When you talk about building a great team, you have to talk about differentiation. You have to talk about evaluation systems. You have to talk about candor. You have to put these things together. Candid evaluations of people, what they're doing right, what they need to do to improve, will constantly be leading you to a differentiation model where the top 20% of your organization, based on performance, numbers, values on the other axis, will show you who is leading the organization. Middle 70 are the hardworking people in the middle doing their job. You want to show them what they have to do to get to the top 20. And of course, the bottom 10, you've got to be clear with them as to what they're doing right and wrong and what they have to do if they're going to survive. Now, the way you get to build a team is you're constantly doing this. You're constantly appraising people, talking to them about their performance. In my own case, what I did and what I'd suggest that you might think about doing is every 3 months, get a piece of paper out and write down on the left-hand side of the paper, here's what I like about what you're doing, and here's what you can do about improving. Here's what you need to do. People must know where they stand. An organization cannot exist without you letting your people know where they stand. I'd ask you, do you think your people, every one of you that I'm talking to, each one of you, as you think about it, are you a leader who's letting all your people know where they stand? Are they leading? Are they growing? Are they about to be fired? Where do they sit in the spectrum? You can't lead an organization without doing that. Now, as you do that, you start taking the best and you build this great team. You keep plucking out the best. You keep raising the bar to get better and better performance. And before you know it, you've got yourself a winning team. You know, differentiation is funny in terms of the fact that it seems to upset people in companies. They go through the first 18 years of their life in grade school, and they're differentiated all the time. And no one thinks it's cruel to give a kid 100% and give another kid 30% who does poorly on the test. And that's acceptable, perfectly acceptable to teenagers. And all of a sudden we join companies, and if you appraise people candidly and openly, and you say, you did well, and you don't do very well, and you let them know, it's cruel. No, it isn't cruel. I mean, it's the kindest thing you can do to an employee. Let them know where they stand. It is total baloney, total nonsense for the people who say, I'm too kind to tell people where they stand. I'm a kind manager. You're not a kind manager. You're a coward. You're the cruelest person in the game because your people someday are going to be surprised when your boss comes to you and says, hey, Joe, we got to get rid of 10% of the people. The economy's gone to hell. And you're sitting there and you go, oh, Jesus, what do I do now? Well, you haven't told anybody where they stand. You haven't got a differentiated crowd. And you have to walk down the hall and go to Joe and say, go to Pete and say, Pete, you and Mary have to go. And Pete and Mary look at you and say, hey, Joe, why me? And you say, well, you really weren't as good as I hoped you were. You never really performed to the level I wanted. And Joe and Mary look up at you and they say, but I've been here 30 years. Why didn't you tell me? That's cruelty. And that's why managers who don't face into issues and don't appraise people, don't you ever let yourself be one of those people. You can't. That's cruelty. That's a bad person. You know, before you differentiate, let's be sure we get one thing straight, though. You got to have a candid appraisal system. If you don't have a candid appraisal system where people are used to being told the truth, and it's part of the everyday process, You can't all of a sudden differentiate. The last thing you can do tomorrow morning, is go out, if you haven't been appraising people, and say, okay, now I got my top 20, my middle 70, my bottom 10, and the bottom 10 is going to say, what? I didn't know that. I never saw that. Because you weren't candid with them and you didn't have an appraisal. So day one, you begin an honest appraisal system. And sometimes it takes a year or two of appraisals and putting 20, 70, 10s in place, or ABC, or whatever number you want to differentiate, in place, so people get used to it before you actually implement it. You know, one of the things I wrote, a book called Jack Straight from the Gut, and I talked about differentiation. A lot of companies went out and started differentiating. And all that did was create chaos, as people hadn't been appraised properly. So if you don't have an appraisal system in place, don't start differentiating. Only differentiate when people have been appraised and know where they stand. Let's get back to that one word again. Don't you dare come to work and not have your people wondering where they stand in your eyes. They got to know. And you got to be telling them frequently. You know, what I'd like you to think about is that every encounter you have with an employee is an appraisal system. Let's talk about budget reviews. A budget review is a numbers game, but you're basically appraising everybody in the room. And you're looking at how they're behaving. Every time you have a strategic planning meeting, same thing. So you got to be thinking of every session as a human resource session. Once you start thinking of every meeting in the company, when a group gets together, as a human resource meeting, and then you step back and evaluate them, you'll constantly be on the game. And you can bring them in for a quick chat, bring them in for a discussion a week later, highlight some of the issues that you saw, coach them along. That's part of the game. That's part of your responsibility as a manager. You can't be called a manager if you're not coaching and appraising people all the time.